Okay, let me give you a little bit of a background. What kind of talk about R2 building a little bit. First off, to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Eric Beeks. I am based out of Dallas, Texas. I actually only live a few minutes from this hotel. I've been a builder now for a little over 15 years since I started building my first R2. And this thing, one second, I'm sorry. So a little bit about the history of the R2 Builders Club. We'll start there. We've been around since 1999. We're founded by a man named Dave Everett out of Australia. Used to organize on a set of Yahoo groups many years ago. And now we've kind of centered in with some stuff on Facebook, and then our main website is astromech.net. We are a global builders club. So I mentioned we were founded in Australia, but we've got droids all over the world. Builders doing all kinds of different things, and not just your standard R2-D2, but R5-D4 and multiple other versions of droids that you've seen in the films, as well as their own version of what it would be. If you come out to our booth, you'll see some color schemes on droids that don't appear in any of the Star Wars films. It's just a fan-made thing that we wanted to do. So when you talk about being a member of the club, is really just a matter of being interested in building an R2. We don't have any real restrictions or membership fees or anything like that you need to pay to be a part of the club. Once you get on to our sites, we have many different kinds of plans that are out there to be able to build your own. So that's part of what it is we are a club that helps each other build. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes along from your basic standard build that doesn't do anything like a static droid, like you see the shell of this one here, to some that have multiple automations that do some of the craziest things, like launch lightsabers and have zappers and buzz saws and all the gadgets you see R2 do in the movies. We've got builders that have come up with a way to integrate that kind of functionality into a droid. Another thing about the R2 Builders Club is the friendships that we create. I mean, most of the people that I spend my time hanging out with are R2 builders these days. 20 years ago, I was the Star Wars nerd in my group of friends, and now my group of friends is nothing but Star Wars nerds. So it kind of creates that collaboration and the friendships, and you find your people in the club that you have all the same interests, and if you didn't know each other when you were a kid, you can tell the same story that when you grew up as a kid, they probably have the same version of that story as well. Another thing about the club is mentoring. There's a lot. It's kind of a lot of people look at building an R2-D2 and say, "Man, that's a lot of stuff I don't know anything about." My own background in high school, I took wood shop and auto body as my electives in school. I know very little about electronics, and it's one of those things that when I tell people, start with what you know. If you have an interest in building one, you've got to have some level of skill set or craftsmanship that you're good at, but may not know the other things. So start with what you know, and then you build from there. And I guarantee you, any question you have, somebody has got an answer for it. They've seen it before. Another thing that we get to do is, as part of the club, is the events. So things like conventions like we're here today, Star Wars celebrations, different promotional things that sometimes Lucasfilm needs somebody for. If they don't have a droid in the area, they'll reach out to looking for somebody that can do it. But we also do charitable events. I've taken my droid to the Children's Hospital here in Dallas a number of times, do robotics club fundraisers for schools and things like that. So a lot of different things that we do as part of the club. Not just building and hanging out and talking about droids, but also things in the community and promotional stuff as well. Go ahead and move on to our next slide here. Come on. It would do it before automatically, now it doesn't want to do anything. Damn it. All right. So kind of got a little bit into why you would want to build an R2. For me, there's lots of different ways that people do it. I tell you my journey personally about where it started. I've been a Star Wars fan since I was 3 years old. Before I even knew about building props and different things, it was always just something that I kind of leaned towards. And then I found the R2 Builders Club, and it kind of became my community of people and just the fascination with how things are put together, where they actually shoot some of this stuff. It all just kind of comes into this one big love for movies. And then once you start seeing something that you've always looked at on screen, and then you think about, wait, I can actually build this and have one of my own, and it just becomes a really big fascination, especially for me, just to deal with. My own story is, I've always been, hands-on with a lot of different materials and different things, building things like cabinets and tables and, furniture. This is something a little bit different, something not as boring as just building a box. So an R2-D2 is, pretty unique kind of thing to have built and put in your house and show to your friends and others. Another thing, why did I pick R2 of all of the things in the Star Wars saga? He's got a lot of personality. He never says anything, but you know what he's thinking, you know what he's doing. You can kind of interpret what those beeps and boops always mean to yourself. Also, when you talk about Star Wars, he's one of the most recognizable characters, and you don't really have to explain who is he. It's kind of the funny thing for us as droid builders is, they'll see an orange droid and they'll say, well, is that Chopper or is that BB-8? And it's like, no, it's one of those things. R2 is R2-D2. You don't really confuse him with any other droids. And then, lastly, on my own droid building journey, it's something I always wanted. To me, there was always the grail of Star Wars props was an R2-D2, a Darth Vader, and a Stormtrooper. Those were the things that you just kind of had to have in my mind if you were going to get into something like this. It's one of those. It was actually, of all the movie props and things that I've built over time, R2 was the first thing I ever built around that stage. But any one of the other droid builders that are out there at our booth, you ask them why did they do it? Their story would be somewhat similar, or they came from it at a different angle. Some of the guys in our club are very much into robotics and electronics, and not as much of a Star Wars fan as they are an engineer, and it's just something that they recognize from a technical perspective, and that would be their journey about why they wanted to build an R2. And they may not be as good in the woodworking or the painting area as they are in the electronics area, but that's where they started, and then they had somebody else help them with, how do I finish the legs, how do I put this together, and whatnot. Okay, let's see. Don't know why my slideshow is doing this, but it is. A couple of things to know. If it's something that building an R2 is something that you need to know, is research is key. It's the most number one thing that you have to do. It's very easy to go out on Facebook and say, well, hey, how do I get started? And then somebody will tell you, you go to astromech.net and you create an account and research. And if that's the number one piece of advice that everybody will give you, and if they don't, they're lying to you. Because there's so many different ways to do an R2-D2. We have plans out there that you can use to 3D print 100%, every single part of it, except for the electronics, obviously. We have droids that are 100% aluminum milled droids. The frame, the legs, the feet, every little part you see on an R2-D2 could be a piece of milled aluminum at some point. We also have, and it's what I consider myself to be, a hybrid type droid. Like this one here has got a plywood frame, plywood legs, 3D printed feet. And then you could find some parts are aluminum, some parts are plastic. I brag with my R2-D2 that's out in the booth that the parts you see in the front, the center vents, at the time I was too cheap to go out and buy the right material, and I hand cut all of the vents out of Subway and Best Buy gift cards. Because it's the same kind of, it's a styrene material, and the patterns were out there, and you could cut it, glue it together, and make it work. But nowadays there are 3D printing and other such ways of manufacturing parts. It's a lot easier to do different ways. So research is a key thing. You always need to do research because your way of doing it will be different than something somebody else has done. Even if it veers one way, it could be, you could run into something that the person you're following didn't run into because you changed path. Building an R2 is not a cheap thing to do. There are, especially if you go into the aluminum parts, you could be somewhere around $13,000 with just buying aluminum machine parts to get the basics of a droid that doesn't do anything and hasn't been painted. You can do it a whole lot cheaper in the 3D printed areas where you just are buying filament and printing things out, but it kind of goes down that time is money thing. How much work do you want to do preparing your parts to save money versus just buying something from somebody that's got it out of a machine shop that it's a lot less work to do. It's more of an assembly than it is an actual build at that point. It's not quick. A lot of our parts that are available in our, and I should take a second, a lot of the things that you look at on an R2 are not the kind of thing that you can just make in your garage. You know, like the domes themselves are, you know, at one point we had spun aluminum domes, and now these are called a hydroformed dome, which uses high pressure water and a rig that uses the water that blows up the aluminum into a certain mold to a certain size each time, and then it gets laser cut from there. So that's a very expensive process to be able to do that. So we don't expect to, you know, a lot of people to have that kind of ability to do that in their garage. So what we do as a club, we do what we call as a part run, where somebody could go out and find a machine shop or a shop that could make that, and then you get a certain number of them that builders want to do, and you can bring the price down a little bit and do it that way. In other ways, some of the other parts are milled out of just blocks of aluminum on machine mills. And because of that, it gets expensive because you're not, you're farming that out to somebody else as opposed to doing it yourself. And when those part runs happen, sometimes it may only happen once a year to get enough people together to do that. So you could find yourself waiting a certain amount of time to get it done, to get the parts you need to be able to finish, and you end up with these big blocks of unable to do something because you're waiting on a part. It's not an easy project to do. There are lots of disciplines that you have to go through in order to build an R2. I've mentioned earlier about the electronics. So there's remote control, and even down that's a rabbit hole in and of itself of what kind of a control do you want to use. Is it your traditional remote control like you would run a RC car or an airplane? We've got guys that have come up with software that uses Sony PlayStation remotes, Xbox remotes. There's another guy that in our group that has come up with his own controller that he calls a stealth controller that's small enough that you can just keep it in your pocket and nobody knows you're the one programming the droid and driving him around. So it becomes this you know, depth that you go into to say, okay, I need to know how to do that. Then there's another discipline about, are you a machinist in machining parts? Are you a painter, so to sand things down and get them primed, prepped, and painted the right colors? So lots of different skill sets that are involved in building a droid. And then lastly, you know, there's not a all-in-one kit that you can get that has everything you need to put one together. We have in our club, you know, I mentioned earlier that we have club blueprints. We have a club spec, what we call it. It's we have two different versions of the spec. One is called a CSL. You'll hear that referred to as that's a legacy spec. That's a version of R2 that we used for many, many years until around 2015. A couple of builders got access to the Lucasfilm archives and went in there with micrometers and started taking measurements of the R2s, the screen-used R2s, and found in some cases our droids were a little short. And I'm talking millimeters here, not anything the human eye could ever foresee. But when we found that, hey, this is a little different, and they drew it up and built one, some of the problems that we had is, you know, when you built an R2, it's like, man, the angle of the legs and the way the thing moves and pivots is so tight, the whole front end pops up. I don't understand why. Well, when we added up all those little millimeters along the length of that droid and put it all in there, those problems disappeared. And it's like, well, okay, you know, the engineering and the math involved in that, in how to figure that one out, now it's gone. So, but what did we do as a club to sit there? We can't abandon all these builders that have been here, you know, since the early days and can't find anything to fit their droid. We came out with a second spec that we call CSR, which stands for Club Spec Revisited. So that way, if you're an older builder, you can find somebody that would build a part for you for the old spec versus the new spec. And then we had a whole matrix and a table. You'll find all this stuff when you do your research out on the site. that will tell you which parts are compatible and which ones aren't. And most of it is all in the body. The legs are pretty much uniform from one spec to the next. But because of that, going back to there's not a kit. We have, like myself, I make wooden frames and wooden legs. There's another guy here in Dallas that makes metal frames and legs and foot shells, and there's another guy in Ohio that makes foot shells, and there's another guy on the other end of Dallas that makes this part, and you name it. You go to all of these different guys making the parts that have to fit that club spec. To get it all to work is a real challenge, especially when we don't have we're not a company, we're not that has gone through a QA of every single thing that happens. We do our best to make it all work. And in most cases, we don't really run into issues with part suppliers that build something out of spec. But because of that, it's not an all-in-one kit, and you're pulling parts from different vendors that really kind of fit your budget. You may want an aluminum dome, but a plywood frame as opposed to aluminum frame and an aluminum dome. And you want to make sure all that stuff goes together. So kind of talking about, we talk about where is all, with how to do it and where do you get all the information. So specifically, I'm more of an R2 builder. So we have our main website that everything that you could possibly want to know that goes back to 1999 about how to build a droid is on astromech.net. If you're into a BB-8, if that's the kind of thing you want to build, there's a different website out there called bb8builders.club. And then there's a 3PO builders, mouse droid builders. So, if you remember from Star Wars, the little droid that Chewie walks into and screams at, we've got a group that builds those. We have Facebook groups. With the popularity of social media, it's kind of, we find ourselves moving from the forum format into Facebook groups. So there's a Facebook group for the R2 builders, C3PO, BB-8. There's other builders groups out there for a group called Droid Division that does lots of different kinds of droids, from battle droids, pit droids, you name it. And then there's another group out there called Mr. Battley's Printed Droids, and that's where if you're a 3D print guy, that's where you'll find all of the 3D print centered kind of conversation that goes on out there. Next up, I talked about research. It's a key thing. And out on the site, we have all the schematics, all the measurements from just how tall is R2, what is the diameter of the body, the height of the dome. All of that is available. But we also have different things out there about open source designs that people have uploaded that allows you to, if you've got a CNC or something that you want to cut it out on your own, that you can get those actual blueprints about how the parts are put together and download those and make those. But again, research. Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you understand what this part is called, because when you look at a wooden leg, is from the top to the bottom of the entire thing, and it has the ankles for R2 integrated into the leg, but the aluminum versions don't. So the aluminum leg is just from here on up, and then you get the aluminum ankle on there. And when you're looking at and trying to compare, do you want to do wood or 3D print or aluminum, you want to make sure a leg is a leg is a leg, because it's not the same thing when you look at the way that the parts were segmented and pulled apart to actually design and build it. 3D printing is a good example of how it's done. It's a very flexible way of building, so some things sometimes tend to not be as rigid and stiff as an aluminum droid or a wooden droid, but the way that they're designed, the parts don't break apart the same way as it would for an aluminum or a wooden one, and that's for strength. It's done, to make sure it's more rigid than it would be if you did the part breaks at the same area. So if you bought something from somebody that's aluminum leg and now you're missing an ankle, now you got to go out and buy an ankle from somebody too. So you want to that's where research comes in. That's where you can look at the schematics, look at what's out there. There's part terminology pages, so it's kind of like our glossary of when somebody talks, what is a beefy ankle? It's this big fat thing that R2 has on his legs. We call different parts like the leg, the foot shell. This moon here is called the outer moon on R2. So you want to get familiar with that. And we have libraries and libraries of reference material out there. We have people who have researched every square inch of R2 and debated, which version of are you doing with all the photos of every single time R2 shows up on screen, from scenes where the image is flipped on camera that he's backwards because they needed the framing for the shot right, or they did a cast of a leg and then they put it on the other side, so the parts up here at the top are on the front on one side and on the back on the other. So we have exhaustively looked at every single bit of every single droid that has ever been on screen, and there is endless debates, even still, about how things were when they were there. And then we go to these panels, listening to the guys. Yeah, if anybody was in the original trilogy panel yesterday, you listen to some of the things that they come up with, and you're like, okay, I've heard that story 100 times, but now I'm in a panel and I heard them say it again, and it's a completely different version of that story from their perspective, and then those parts start coming together. So it's always interesting, even, what are we, almost 50 years from Star Wars, some of the stories that are coming out that you still haven't heard yet. There was a completely unrelated to droid building, there was a conversation about why speeder bikes were in the Arizona desert for the Jabba sail barge scene. That they were never there, but things like that pop up all this time later, so more research goes into it. Also, I'm talking a lot about all the mechanics that's there, but we also have very smart people that have come up with diagrams for electronics, different ways. I mentioned earlier like a PlayStation remote. So they've used, instead of using your traditional RC, you have a Arduino-driven control unit that uses Bluetooth radio to a PlayStation remote, and it's got all the libraries on there that will drive the speed controllers and the motors to drive them around, trigger a couple of sounds. So there's lots of different things that are out there, and they've come up with diagrams, all the software libraries and packages, and made it all available for builders to do. So it's one of those things that when I say that if you're not an electronics expert, don't fret. I'm not one either. But there's enough information out there to get me started, and there's a ton of people out there that have done it before, but we've got all of that out there. Also, lots of online resources with the files that I've mentioned earlier, 3D models, schematics, and then the builders groups and the forums that, tons of people collaborating together, working together to help you with what it is. This is Dallas, I'm in Dallas, so if you're a local, every now and again we get together as a build group and help each other with what our builds are. If you're having an issue, a couple years ago I did a thing helping everybody out with an R5 dome that we all bought it, and it didn't fit quite the way it should have, so I came up with a way to fix it, and everyone brought theirs over. We had ordered a couple of pizzas and had fun and fixed everybody's dome one day. Skill set. So I talked a little bit earlier about that. Because R2 can be a complicated build, I always encourage people to start with what they know. Are you a woodworker? Are you a painter? Are you an RC guy? What is it that brought you to building it? Start with that skill set, and you'll become very familiar with the ins and outs of how to build an R2 as you do that research, and start with what you know, and then when you run into that next step that says, okay, how do I do this? Post a question out in the forum if you didn't find an answer through your own research, and somebody will answer. There's always somebody out there. I forget the numbers, but I want to say we're somewhere over 10,000 builders globally today. I don't know if anybody that's out in the audience might have a better number. So there's lots of resources out there that can help you through any of the stumbles you might have, and you'll learn that skill set as you go. And that kind of talks a whole lot about community support as well. Next slide I have here. So I've already kind of gone into materials, so just kind of a breakdown. Our aluminum droids, they're very expensive to do. It's mostly assemble. A lot of that one-on-one work that you do there's not as much work to do in doing an aluminum droid versus, say, a 3D printed one, because there's lots of sanding and assembly and gluing that has to happen there. Wood, which is where I spend most of my time, is less expensive than an aluminum droid. It is more labor intensive to do because of the extra work that you have to do specifically around when you're working on the legs to hide all the layers of plywood that are there. I mentioned 3D printing. It's a lot cheaper. It's extremely labor intensive. If you're a 3D print person, it's sanding, 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 lots more sanding, and then even when you're done with that, sand some more. And because of all the panel lines and everything that's on R2, if you get too aggressive, it starts to disappear, and then you could end up with another problem. So there's a lot of work involved with that one. Also, we have members that make some of the parts available that are resin cast. They'll take an original aluminum part, get permission from the guy who machined it, cast it, and then sell resin cast versions as opposed to 3D printed ones that make it easier to work with and cheaper than aluminum. Then, one of the things we didn't really talk about yet is R2 changes his configuration in the movie from what we call a 2-3-2 droid. So like this here, what you're seeing is a 2-legged droid. The ones you see down here are 3-legged, and these are permanently in 2-legged mode or 3-legged mode. Because to move him from 2-legged mode to 3-legged mode and then back to 2-legged mode is a very complicated step, so he doesn't trip and fall over and go do a face plant because something's not right. There's a lot of electronics, a lot of mechanics, motors, pulleys, all kinds of stuff inside that go into it. So it does get very advanced to do that. If it's your first droid, I would recommend doing that for a second droid if that's something that you want to do. But it is possible. There's a couple of different ways that people have done that. Some of the ones that you see on screen today, I think it's season 3 of Mandalorian, there's an R5-D4 that goes from 2-legged to 3-legged and drives off, and that's actually a fan-made droid that they have in the show. That it's one of the things, if you've watched a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff where George always talks about, he has bad droid karma, that it's always got problems. The R2s that were in the original trilogy never worked the way they were supposed to, and in some cases they just attached a fishing line to it and dragged it across the desert because they could never get things to work the way they wanted to. And it got better with the prequels, and then nowadays, and this is a true story, is that the fan-made droids have come so far advanced since the prequel trilogy had come out that when The Force Awakens came out, the guys that built the R2 units for that movie were builders just like me. They approached Kathleen Kennedy at a convention in London and said, if you really want somebody who knows how to do droids, you should hire us. Just kind of tongue in cheek, and then before they knew it, they were in an interview, and 2 of our droid builders were on set and did the droids for all of the movies and some of the TV shows that were based in England, and then other builders here based in the U.S. have been doing them for the TV shows that are shot here in the U.S., like Mandalorian and Ahsoka. So another cool reason to do it. I don't know if we'll ever see any production based in Dallas for Star Wars, but it's still kind of a neat thing. So we talked about lots of different ways to do a droid, and in the end, it always kind of, what does it look like when it's done? And I took this shot back at a premiere we did for The Last Jedi back in, 2017. And in this shot is a 100% aluminum droid, a hybrid build, and a 100% 3D printed. And when you look at them right there, does anybody really know which one is which? And that's what's really important. I mean, you could sit there and listen to one builder over another builder try to, kind of try and create a hierarchy of whose droid is better than the other one, and I can guarantee you that the kids that come and look at your droid at a booth, the people, the fans that don't know how the sausage is made cannot tell the difference, and they don't care. What's really important is, are you proud of what you've built? Does it look like an R2-D2 or a droid that was in a movie? And the answer is yes. If you go to the club specs that we use, it will look just like the ones in the shows, and the ones that are being produced today are fan-made droids. Most of the droids at Rogue One were all fan-made. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of things that you can do. When it's done, they all look like R2 or a variation of R2. I won't go too deep on electronics. I think we kind of covered some of this stuff. The electronics, how does it run? We use standard remotes. The stealth controllers that I mentioned earlier, there's all the different servos and different versions of motors that can be put into it. We have some, I don't want to say we have club spec electronics, but we have some very standardized ways that you could see that maybe 80% of the droids all kind of follow the same journey. But if you're really advanced into robotics or really want to push the limit, you start getting into some uncharted territory, and you're kind of on your own at that point. But there's some really smart guys in our group that have come up with some really cool stuff, things that solving problems that I didn't even know was a problem yet that they've done. Now that you've got a droid, what do you want to do with it? You know, do you want to just have it on display in your house? But you know, I bring mine to the conventions like this all the time. Been to Fan Expo here in Dallas multiple times. Taken it out to Star Wars Celebration. You know, there's local parades that they want them in. Like I mentioned earlier, charitable events. I've taken them to the Children's Hospital. There's another school here in Plano called My Possibilities that I've done fundraisers with. And then I mentioned earlier, you know, you meet new friends. I mean, like I said, most of my circle of friends today I've met because of my R2-D2 and the work that I've done. And there's other events that pop up every now and then. You know, I'm not going to say things like birthday parties or anything, but when you have an R2-D2 and people start understanding, you know, that it's a real looking droid, it's not just something you would have bought at Target or Walmart, that people start looking for like weddings and all kinds of events that are out there. So it's a lot of fun to do. It's a journey. It's kind of taken over my whole life. I have a day job, but I'd rather be doing stuff with my droid than doing my day job for sure. So I know I've monologued for a long time here, talked a lot. We've got about 30 minutes left in our time slot, so I want to kind of take some questions from the audience and see if anybody's got anything. The promoters have given me this Mandalorian statue to give away to whoever answers the most creative or interesting question. So feel free to go ahead and start, and I'll take whatever questions you got. Yes, sir.
What's the latest R2-D2?
Lightest, I mean, one of the older ways of building one we had was called a styrene material. It's when I mentioned earlier about using gift cards, that's the same kind of material. We actually have a set of plans that you can cut the whole thing, and I would say that is probably the lightest way to build one. And Zach, you're building a styrene droid. What would you say yours weighs?
Right now, it's got the feet motors in it, no electronics, but everything else is there. I would say maybe a little over 100 pounds.
Okay.
Most of that's just in the feet.
Yeah. There's some things you can't cut. You know, when you want to put, you know, electronics are electronics and motors are motors. But the aluminum ones are the really heavy mothers that are out there. But it takes two people to load them in most cases. So, okay, good question. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
How do you guys take the droids from after and not have like?
Oh, now that is the $1 million question right there. Yes, I used to drive an orange Chevy pickup around, and I hated having him in the bed of the truck because he was exposed to weather. I couldn't park him anywhere without fear of somebody stealing him. So I went out and bought a big Mercedes Sprinter van, you know, that's big enough to haul about 4 or 5 droids around the country. And it's like, yes, I told my wife, yes, R2 has his own car now. You know, and we go out on dates all the time. I'll take him and we'll go somewhere. But yeah, no, all kidding aside, and not everybody's going to go buy a car specifically to haul a droid around like I did. But depending on the kind of vehicle you have, like SUVs, some of them have a higher roof. I think Fords have a much higher roof on the inside than a Chevy. So you can pull the dome off and stick them in the back of like an Expedition versus a Tahoe. But Tahoes are shorter in the back, and he kind of needs to go down on his back. So we have one of the things I actually make is what we call a droid sled that we can stick up behind the back of an R2 in 3-legged mode, take his dome off, and then strap him to that, and then you fold him over, lay him on his back, and he's supported in all the right areas, so you don't stick the weight on the wrong spots that could bind or break something, and then you load them up in the back of a car like you would put a patient in the back of an ambulance and haul them around on a gurney. So that's one of the other ways. Some guys have quick release mechanisms that they've built. They'll just pull the legs off, pull some wires off, and throw all the parts in the back seat of their car. But it's a priority. You know, for me, I got lazy and I didn't want to mess with even taking the dome off, so I can just lift them up, put them in the back of my van, and drive wherever I want. So good question, and I could tell you that's one of the longest threads out on astromech.net is how do you transport your droid? And you know, it's like guys I think there's one guy out in California that has a Honda Element that actually has a wheelchair, not a lift, but a crane, a wheelchair crane that he pulls the dome off, attaches it to the inside of his droid, and uses the motor to pulls it up, swings him into the back. And it's specifically designed for a Honda Element. So yet another way, you know, it's like somebody who went out and bought a car specifically for his R2-D2. But it becomes an addiction when you go down that road. But good question, and we're always looking for a better answer. Anyone else? Yes, sir, in the back. Yeah, blue shirt all the way back, yeah. Yeah.
After you get seen, rumors, heard of, high-tech guys have a big fancy, does everything. Are any of them experimenting or starting with AI?
I mean, there has been multiple automated ways of droid operation. You know, years ago, I don't want to say like 2005, Hasbro had a little toy droid that was about yay tall. That was fully interactive and could do stuff, and people were trying to figure out how to pull the guts out of that and stick it in a bigger one. And you know, now with AI being what it is, they're not to a point where it's driving itself around, because you know, in a convention like this, you know, 150-pound droid or heavier with steel foot shells or something at the very front of that thing, if he loses his mind and starts, you know, driving off doing whatever he wants, that's a pretty heavy, you know, object rolling around that's uncontrolled by a human, and it becomes a real problem. But that being said, AI has been used to start, you know, I mentioned the Arduino. There has been builders that have used AI generated code to run, to come up with the initial run of the code, and then they've kind of tweaked it. There have been builders that have used sensors, you know, like you would see in a car bumper, that tells you something's coming, that they put it in the dome to track people. So it automate the dome movement around, but not necessarily driving around by itself and deciding to take a left and take a right. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure as the software gets better, and the liability goes down, that could happen. So, good question.
Can I
Yeah.
add to that?
Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
So, when they did, I think it was the Star Wars show that did the Science of Star Wars special.
Yeah.
They actually did have a droid that was built that used IBM Watson. So that's kind of our early AI.
Yeah.
And one of the, well, two of the people who actually helped to build some prop droids, so Michael McMaster and Mike Senna, in California, were the ones that built that droid. But it was still limited in what it could do. They had to really kind of control some of what they did.
Yeah.
But we also now, if you've seen the videos of the new droids they're debuting at Disney, we call them the Duckling droids, the BDX droids. We do have builders who are running their code through machine learning to teach them how to walk. So that's been a pretty big jump for our community. Still in the process, but it's
Yeah.
pretty cool stuff.
Droids in training.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy new world. Like I said, I started building my R2 in 2009. And the way I built it then versus the way I build it today, I've got two droids, one I just finished about a year ago. And my first one took me about 2 years to do, and this second one took me about 6 months. And that's because we got better. And there's always a debate in our club that is like, are you a builder or an assembler? But then there are guys that we all stand, we all freely, but we stand on the shoulders of the people that were here before us. I go back to Dave Everett. He was the first guy who actually drew up a set of plans to build an R2, and then we had a guy go out and get the actual the actual specs for a screen used, and they adjusted that drawing. So visually, we got it right. And then we improved well above what Lucasfilm ever did for the droids of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. But now you even see what they did. The Dio droid from Rise of Skywalker, they put mechanics in it that when he would, if you ever looked really close to that droid, there's like little antennae that stick out of the back of his head. So now when he backs up, the antennae flare out, and it's all code. It's not mechanical. So again, you know, in the production realm of it, they've gotten better. For our club, we've gotten a lot better. You know, there's a friend of mine and another builder up in Ohio that has built a complete dome system to start eliminating all the wiring that goes inside of a dome. So you don't have to worry about the routing of it. It doesn't get caught up in any of the mechanics of it. And it's something that you look at and say, okay, this is something I didn't even know was a problem that needed to be solved, but he did it before it ever became one. And then he grew on top of that with a module that goes inside that opens up all the panels, and you can choose to shoot a lightsaber out of one or a sensor scope out of another one, and it's all open and clickable that you say, okay, I don't want the sensor scope to pop out of this panel. I want my lightsaber to pop out of it. You just pop it out, plug a different module in, and do it. Another guy that we have in our group, I think his username is called Rotopod. And the doors, if you ever watch Star Wars, you'll see that the same panel is used for multiple different things. And what he'll do is he'll open up a door, and he's got a Gatling gun type of mechanism inside that will spin around and choose, oh, I'm going to drop out a probe arm. No, now I'm going to drop out a buzz saw, and it'll spin around on the inside and do that. That didn't even exist when I started. No one even thought of that when I started building my droid. So I look at the guys that were the heroes of our build club when I started, and the guys that are doing it today that have taken us to another level, and somebody in this room could take it to the next level. What are we going to do? What's going to be the next iteration to say, okay, mine can do this, can yours? So always fun to watch what somebody new comes up with and spends the time to develop. So, next question. Yes, sir, in the hat. Oh, well, that's a hard one because we all want to start seeing it become a droid, and when painting is always like that last step to do. I'll leave it at this: is you wait till the last possible minute to do it, because you will scratch up your paint job. You will have to repaint things. You will find that something doesn't quite fit the way you thought it would, and then you'll have to mess up your paint job to rework something and then paint it again. The beauty of being a Star Wars droid is that they're supposed to be beat up and weathered and banged up, so sometimes it kind of adds to the weathering. It's what we always say is like you're working on it and you bang something up or scratch it and you're like, it's weathering, and then you move on. You don't really, it's not like you just restored a car and somebody scratched the door. It's, no big deal, I took a face plant, my dome's got a big skid mark all over the front of it, but hey, that just adds to the appeal of how cool it is. Good question. Yeah, some guys will take theirs to a body shop and have it painted professionally. Some guys will send it off to a powder coater if they're an aluminum droid because of the powder coating process, because it's a far more durable paint job than just your standard rattle can or spray that you would do, but powder coating is another option that's there too. So it's just a matter of, and there are places that have done it, droids before, that you can find resources for on the group. But if you got a buddy that's a auto body guy, that can do it, he can do it too. It's sometimes people get really cool. They're like, oh, that's cool. I painted an R2-D2 today, so maybe they'll throw you a discount. So, any other questions? Yes, sure.
3 parts, really short.
Okay.
Your preference on the droids you make, how you build them, wood, aluminum?
I'm a hybrid builder, so the wooden frames. I have my own design. That's like what you see here on this one here is a design that I collaborated with some other builders on. So I actually make and sell the wooden frames and legs and variety of 3D printed parts. I'm a hybrid builder, but I'm also a cheap builder. So I'm very budget oriented when it comes to that. And it's a question we get a lot in there, you know, how much does it cost to build one of these? And I would say on average, a starting cost would be around $3,000. And then from there, I've seen droids $25K and then some.
How many droids have you built? Like, how many do you have?
I have 2 today. I used to have a third, but sold it, and then I've helped other builders probably in total, if you added up all the fractions stuff, I probably built about 5 or 6.
And then the last part, if you had a choice, someone came and said, I'm going to give you your dream part piece, arms, rotating, this, hologram, what do you want?
Dream part piece.
The dream thing that you're meant to do.
The,
What do you want it to do? Like,
I guess I'm not following the question specifically.
If you wanted your droid to do anything.
Oh, okay. If I had it, okay. Thank you, Mahala. Fly. That would be cool because it'd be a whole lot easier to get it across the parking lot. Yes, of course I'd have to have some kind of cool fuel that didn't burn the car up when he got in there, but yeah, but I mean that would be cool. You know, maybe the holo projector actually working a hologram would be neat. Good question. Any other questions? We got 10 minutes, so don't forget the Mandalorian statue. Yes.
Speaking of the little rotary thing somebody built inside, how much room on average is there inside of a droid?
Not as much as you want. Inside there, I would say after you look at the interior of it, you probably have maybe 2 cubic feet tops. And it gets used up really quick when you're thinking about, I need to stick my hand in here and work on something or pull something out to get it on. The insides get real tight. So when you're thinking about all the automations and the servos and all the different things that you really start to fill up a lot of space and trying to trace down which wire is shorting out, you know, always becomes a challenge. And that's where all this innovation comes from, is that, you know, you say 6 or 7 years ago, I look inside of a dome and you see all the servos and all the wires and all of the things that are in there. It was like a work of art just to look at it. But when it didn't work, when the servo quit working or something was jamming up and you had to sit there and pull all that apart and figure out why, became really, you know, it was definitely a barrier to actually go in there and fix the problem. So that's where the innovation comes from, the guy that comes up with a PCB board to eliminate all that wiring and keep it from shorting out. You know, other things that we've done over the years is like the lead acid batteries are starting to be replaced with lithium ion, and you know, my droids specifically use drill batteries from DeWalt because they're very small, compact, and they're very easy to charge when you're not using them, and they don't go dead like a lead acid battery would. So kind of a long way around to answer your question, but there's very limited space in there. A lot of the droids that you would see on screen that did stuff were built specifically to do that one thing because of the whether it was like a pneumatic booster that was in there that was launching something, or if Kenny Baker had to fit inside of it to do something. There was very limited very few droids could do every single thing you see R2 do on screen because there's not enough room inside to do all of that. But with good minds thinking on the problem and coming up with ways to free up more and more space on the inside, you can get more and more in there. So, good question. Anyone? Yes, in the far back.
Has anyone in your group that you know of, have they ever made like a tiny R2 that's able to move?
Yes, very good question. There's a designer that we have as part of the group. His name is Michael Badley, and he's got his own thing that he does with all of his 3D printed stuff, but he has what he calls baby droids. And we actually have a few of them in the booth if you want to come by and take a look, that are micro versions of R2 and Chopper and some of the other ones. And some of them are done in kind of a, I don't want to call it a comical view, but more of like a cartoonish view with the way the domes are made and stuff to just kind of add a little bit more personality to it. There's also a builder out in Colorado that builds 2/3 scale R2. So it's a lot smaller, and he's done lots of creative things with it, him and his dad, like paint him up to look like a minion from Despicable Me, and just different personalities and things. So just kind of, something different than what you would normally see. So people have shrunk down the plans and done something smaller and a little bit more animated and fun to do. There was a guy, I don't know if he's still here now, but he's like one of the pit droids that you see, that he's got it out there driving around on a speeder bike. Looks like he's riding a speeder bike, but it's just an RC car with some servos on it, but it looks cool. A lot of fun. Good question.
The 2/3 builders here in Texas, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's his name? Brian Thompson. Is he in Texas now? I thought he was up in Colorado.
Colorado, but Dan is up in Lubbock.
Oh, okay, yeah, father and son. Okay. Any other questions? Got another one?
What's the largest R2 ever, and has anybody ever gotten a scholarship from being part of the R2?
Largest R2 is actually somewhere in London. A guy built one big enough for him to get in, and not, like the original ones had Kenny Baker inside, and he was a short person to be able to get in there. But somebody built one for a full size, like a 5'10" individual to get inside one, and it's massive. I don't know how tall it actually is, but it's the biggest one that's done. As far as a scholarship, Nancy, you would probably know better than anybody.
Well, there's not like a specific scholarship, but I have heard of, I've talked to kids that have done this project, and then they've used it like on their school resume, and a lot of times it gets people's attention, especially if you're doing something like in electronics or engineering or science, that you're showing, you've learned these skills because of this hobby, and you think you can utilize that in a career. And so
Yeah.
it would be something that would get, attention of scholarship committees for sure.
Yeah. Look at your local STEM programs, and it's one of those things that gets you noticed for sure.
Yes, and there's a lot of people that do robotics that have done some of that too, that might be on robotics teams, school robotics teams, and that's definitely a great place to show it off too.
All right. Okay, 5 minutes. Has anybody got anything else? Nancy? What?
Oh,
Go ahead.
So I know that everybody's always on the cusp of whatever's coming out, but have you seen droids from Acolyte yet?
I've seen YouTube videos with the PIP droid in it, and I've seen a few people start building them already.
The guy over here that's built one, who got at his table.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing. I mean, there's always, when a new show comes out, there's always the race to who's going to have the first one. When BB-8 first drove across the stage in 2015 for Force Awakens at Star Wars Celebration, everybody freaked that was an actual thing and it wasn't CGI. And people were, I was on the plane flying back, and I was listening to other builders on there working together, sketching stuff out on the plane on the way home. And then at the Rogue One panel, at Star Wars Celebration in London, a year later, they actually showed a video of what BB-8 looked like on the inside on Friday, and on Sunday the bill of materials was posted, because our group pulled that thing apart on that screen over and over and over and over again to figure out how they did it, and that's what they're doing. And Nancy mentioned earlier, like the little chicken walkers that they have at the parks, they're already trying to figure it out before Disney can. So it's always a race to be first. Sometimes you find out that when you hit the screen that it's not quite the way you thought it was in the trailer or the promotional material, but that's what makes it fun. So, all right, I think.
Droid builders are already.
Yeah, I bet there's 1,000. I bet there's at least 1,000 builders in there already trying to reverse engineer it and figure it all out. So.
Hey, before we run out of time, let's do it.
Yeah, I was getting ready on that one. I know the next panel's probably about ready to get started too. So try and figure out do I get to pick who had the most interesting question? I don't know. There's so many questions. Anybody want to nominate one?
I'll nominate somebody.
Go ahead.
Yeah, either the scholarship or him, because he asked about what your dream part and all that.
That's so dream part or scholarship. I want to see a raise of hands for dream part. All right, Scholarship.
Do I get to vote or?
Yes, you get to vote. All right. All right. There were people not raising hands, so one more time. Dream part. Scholarship. Damn it, you guys are so close. One more. I need hands. Not everybody's raising their hands. I'm going to count one more time. All right. Dream part. Scholarship. Okay. That one, scholarship. That was good.
For dream part. All right, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. Other one.
Scholarship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
7, 8, 9, 10.
All right. Oh, shit. 11, we're tied. Scholarship. All right. Thank you very much. If you have any more questions, please come see us out at the Droid Builder booth. Enjoyed it. Thank you all.